At 2:07 in the morning, I called the one man I had spent 3 years pretending I didn't need. I expected him to ask what happened. He didn't. The doors of the emergency room slid open, and Soren Vale walked through them like the building belonged to him. Which, in a way, it did. He owned half the block. He owned people who worked in this hospital. But none of that mattered right now because his eyes went straight to my shirt. White cotton, soaked through with red. My arm hung useless in a blue sling, and every breath pulled at something torn deep in my side. A monitor beeped somewhere behind me, counting out a heartbeat that didn't feel like mine. Soren didn't say a word. He just stopped, 3 feet from the bed, and looked at the blood like he was trying to work out how much of it was mine. 2 officers stood near the curtain. One of them had a clipboard. The other kept glancing at Soren the way people glance at something they've heard stories about but never expected to see up close. "Mr. Vale," the one with the clipboard said, "we need you to wait outside." Soren didn't move. "HI viewers, before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. If the person you loved most walked in and said nothing at all, would that silence scare you more than if they'd screamed? Tell me in the comments, I want to know." "Where's the boy?" the officer said, turning to me. "The child that was in the vehicle with you." I opened my mouth. Nothing came out at first. My throat felt like it had been packed with gravel. "Sir," the officer said again, sharper now, "where is Tavi Vale?" Soren's head turned toward me so fast I felt it before I saw it. I hadn't told him yet. I hadn't told anyone yet, not really, not the whole truth, because saying it out loud made it real, and once it was real there was no taking it back. "I got him out of the car," I said. My voice cracked on the last word. "I got him out. I hit him. I was going back for him and I stopped." Soren's jaw tightened. For the first time since he'd walked in, something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. I know his anger. I've seen it aimed at grown men twice his size and watched them fold. This was different. This was fear, and it looked wrong on him like a coat that didn't fit. "And what?" he said quietly. "Someone found me first." The room went still in a way that had nothing to do with sound. The officer with the clipboard cleared his throat and said the words that would follow me for the rest of that night. "There's no record of a child being brought in. Not here. Not at any hospital in the county." Soren looked at me like the floor had opened underneath him. I'd known Soren Vale for 3 years. I'd watched him negotiate with men who carried guns like other people carry car keys. I'd watched him sit across from senators and make them nervous without raising his voice. I had never once seen him look like he didn't know what to do. Until now. "Micah," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like something breaking. "Where is my nephew?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't have an answer that wouldn't destroy him. Then his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out without looking away from me, thumb moving on instinct, and his face changed before he even turned the screen toward me. A photograph, sent from a number he didn't recognize. Tavi, small, in his blue jacket, standing in front of a wall I didn't recognize. His eyes were open. He looked scared but alive. The timestamp sat in the corner of the image. 40 minutes after the crash. 40 minutes after I lost consciousness on the side of the road. Someone had Tavi. Someone had taken a photo of him. And whoever it was had access to him after I went down, which meant whoever attacked us hadn't grabbed him and run. They'd kept him close. On purpose. Soren's hand started to shake. Just slightly. Just enough that I noticed because I notice everything about him. He looked up from the phone and met my eyes, and for one terrible second I understood something I never wanted to understand. The man standing in front of me, the man who ran half of Chicago's underworld from behind a legitimate business empire, the man who was never afraid of anything. He had no idea what to do next, and neither did I. 3 weeks before the crash, I noticed the first transfer. It wasn't large. $12,000, routed through an account labeled facilities maintenance, moved out on a Tuesday and gone by Wednesday morning. I almost missed it. I would have missed it if I hadn't spent 3 years learning to read Soren's finances the way other people read a room. I run Soren's life, not his empire, his life. His calendar, his contracts, the 50 small decisions a day that keep a man like him from having to think about anything except the 2 or 3 that actually matter. Somewhere in those 3 years, without either of us saying it out loud, I became the person who understood him better than his own family did. Tavi came to us 18 months ago, after a car accident took his parents on the Kennedy Expressway. Soren doesn't talk about that night. He doesn't have to. I watched him rebuild an entire wing of his house around a 6-year-old's bedroom. Watched him learn how to braid a stuffed rabbit's ears because Tavi liked it done a certain way. Watched a man who once put a rival boss in the hospital sit on the floor doing a 400-piece puzzle at midnight because Tavi couldn't sleep. That's the Soren most people never see. Calder Wren saw it too. Calder had been with Soren longer than I had. His financial strategist, his numbers man, the one who made the dangerous parts of Soren's business look, on paper, like nothing more than a string of successful investments. Calder had a laugh that put people at ease and a memory for names that made everyone in the building feel important. I liked him. Everyone liked him. That was the whole point of Calder. "You've been distracted," Soren said to me one evening. "Over reports I wasn't really reading. I'm fine. Micah." "I'm fine," I said again, and it was the first real lie I told him in 3 years. I didn't tell him about the transfer. I didn't tell him that whoever moved that money had done it using credentials tied to Tavi's private security detail. The same system that tracked when Tavi left for school, when he came home, which car he rode in, which route the driver took. I told myself I was protecting Soren. I told myself I needed proof before I brought him something that could tear his organization apart from the inside. I told myself a lot of things that week. 2 nights later, I found a second transfer, then a third, each one small enough to pass as routine, each one touching some piece of the system built to keep Tavi safe. I started staying late, pulling logs, cross-referencing access times against staff schedules, building a spreadsheet nobody else knew existed. That's when the first message came through. Stop looking. No name. No number I could trace. I deleted it and told myself it was nothing. A glitch. A wrong number. Some low-level scare tactic from a rival who'd noticed me digging around in places I wasn't supposed to be. Then the second one arrived, 20 minutes later. "We know where the pup goes to school." My hands went cold. I sat there in the dark of my office with my own heartbeat loud in my ears, staring at a phone screen that had just told me, in 7 words, that whoever was inside our systems knew exactly how much that child mattered, and exactly how to reach him. I should have gone straight to Soren. I know that now. Instead, I got up and I walked down the hallway to the small monitor room where the feed from Tavi's bedroom camera ran 24 hours a day. Because I needed to see him. I needed to see that small shape breathing under his blanket, safe, unaware, still just a kid who liked his rabbit's ears braided a certain way. I pulled up the feed. For 3 seconds, everything looked normal. Then the screen went black. The rain started 20 minutes before the car following us made its move. I'd picked Tavi up from his evening reading group like I did every Thursday, and he talked the entire ride about a book with a dragon that couldn't breathe fire, which he found deeply unfair on the dragon's behalf. I remember laughing. I remember thinking, for one ordinary stretch of road, that nothing was wrong. Then I checked the mirror and saw the same headlights I'd seen 3 turns back. I didn't say anything to Tavi. I just changed our route the way I'd been trained to, cutting off Halstead instead of continuing straight through. The headlights followed the turn. That's when I understood this wasn't coincidence. Whoever was behind us knew our emergency route. Nobody knows our emergency route. Nobody outside a very short list of people who work directly for Soren's private security. I tried calling him. My phone showed the call connecting, ringing, and then dying with no answer. Later, I'd learned the tower nearest us had been jammed for exactly the 9 minutes I needed it most. The impact came from the side, hard enough to spin us into the guardrail. Metal folded. Glass came apart in a sound I still hear some nights. My head hit the window and everything went white at the edges. I don't remember getting my seatbelt off. I remember Tavi crying, calling my name, and some part of my brain that wasn't hurt yet took over and got him out of that car before I let myself feel anything. There was a maintenance shed near the guardrail, half collapsed, mostly hidden by brush. I put Tavi inside it, told him to stay quiet no matter what he heard, and made him repeat it back to me twice before I believed he understood. I was gonna go back for him. I swear I was going back for him. I made it maybe 40 feet before someone hit me from behind. I went down hard, into the wet gravel on the shoulder of the road. Rain coming down steady now, cold enough to feel like something separate from the pain in my ribs. For a while I just lay there, listening to my own breathing, unable to tell if my legs still worked. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, unhurried, like whoever it was already knew I wasn't going anywhere. Tavi? I said into the dark, because some stupid, desperate part of me hoped it was him. Silence answered me. The footsteps got closer. Whoever it was crouched down beside me. I couldn't see a face, just a shape, a shoulder, and on that shoulder, lit for half a second by a passing headlight from the freeway above, a small embroidered mark I recognized instantly. It belonged to Soren's own private security division. I tried to speak and managed only a broken sound. The figure leaned in close enough that I felt breath against my ear. Tell your alpha this wasn't supposed to happen to you. Then the world folded in on itself, and I stopped fighting to stay conscious, because there was nothing left in me to fight with. I woke up to the sound of Soren's voice on the other side of a curtain, low and controlled in a way that meant he was one sentence away from losing that control completely. I don't care what protocol says. I want every camera within 2 miles of that overpass pulled within the hour. Detective Rafe Mercer's voice answered, calmer, steadier. You'll get faster results working with us than around us, Mr. Vale. I've never needed anyone's help finding what's mine. You've never lost anyone like this before. That shut him up. I heard it in the silence that followed. Heard him absorb the sentence like a blow he hadn't braced for. When he came in to see me, the anger I'd expected in the emergency room finally arrived. 3 hours late and twice as sharp. You knew, he said, before the crash. You knew someone was inside my organization. I didn't deny it. There was no point. I was investigating, I said. I didn't have proof. You had a message telling you they knew where my nephew went to school, and you didn't think that was worth telling me? I thought I could handle it before it became your problem. It was never not my problem, Micah. His voice cracked on my name, the same way it had in the ER, and for a second I saw past the fury to what was underneath it. A man terrified he'd already lost the one person in this world he'd promised to keep safe. Give me a name. I don't have one. Not one I'm sure of. Give me who you suspect. No. His head came up sharp. If I say a name out loud right now and I'm wrong, I said, you'll act on it before anyone can prove otherwise. You know you will. And an innocent person could end up dead because I was careless with a guess instead of careful with the truth. He stared at me like he wanted to argue and couldn't find the ground to stand on. That's the thing about Soren. Underneath all the control, he knows when someone's right. He just hates hearing it. Detective Mercer stepped back into the room before either of us could say anything else. His expression had changed. Whatever news he was carrying, it wasn't good. The security footage from the overpass and the 2 blocks surrounding it, he said. All of it was wiped. Deliberately. Whoever did it knew the system well enough to erase a 14-minute window without triggering a single alert. Someone inside, Soren said quietly. There's one camera they missed, Mercer said. A private feed from a business 2 blocks out. Grainy. Partial. But it caught someone crossing the lot carrying a child. He turned his tablet toward us. The image was dark, blurred by rain and distance, but clear enough to make out one detail neither of us could unsee. The figure carrying Tavi wore the same insignia I'd seen kneeling beside me on the shoulder of that road. Soren's own personal security division. Someone we trusted enough to guard a 6-year-old's bedroom had carried him away into the dark. For 6 hours, we thought it was over. Soren's people traced the insignia to a senior guard named Foss, a man who'd worked personal security for 3 years and vanished the same night as the crash. His apartment was empty. His car was gone. Everyone in the room exhaled at once because a name finally existed to hate, and hating a name feels like progress even when it isn't. Then his abandoned vehicle turned up behind a shuttered auto shop on the south side, and inside it, tucked under the passenger seat, they found Tavi's backpack. I watched Soren hold that small blue backpack like it was made of glass. For the first time since the hospital, something in his face loosened. Not relief exactly. Something closer to permission to believe, for just a moment, that this was almost finished. I should have felt it too. I wanted to. Instead I kept looking at the backpack, and something about it sat wrong with me. It was too clean. Too easy. A man running for his life doesn't stop to park his car behind a shop and leave evidence sitting in plain view for anyone with a badge to find. This is too convenient, I said. Soren looked at me like I'd said something cruel. You'd rather I not be relieved. I'd rather you not stop looking. I took the backpack from him before he could argue and unzipped the front pocket, running my fingers along the seams the way I'd learned to check every bag that came near Tavi after the first anonymous message. Near the bottom lining, my fingers caught on something hard and small, sewn in rather than simply dropped inside. A tracker, not a toy, not something that belonged to a 6-year-old's backpack by accident. Someone had planted it there on purpose. Someone had wanted us to find this car. This backpack, this name. The device pulsed once under my thumb, a small red light blinking awake, and before I could pull my hand back, static crackled out of it, low and distorted, resolving slowly into a voice that made every person in that room go still. Not Foss's voice. Someone older. Someone calm in a way that felt far more dangerous than anger ever could. Soren's whole body went rigid beside me, like he recognized something in that voice before his mind had caught up to why. You're looking in the wrong direction, Soren. The line went dead. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The backpack sat between us, ordinary and small, and suddenly the most terrifying object in the room, because whoever had just spoken to us hadn't sounded like a kidnapper hiding from the police. They'd sounded like someone who had been waiting a very long time for Soren to finally start paying attention. The bank records hit the table at 4 in the morning, and Soren went still the second he saw the first page. 6 months. That was how far back the trail went. Not weeks. Not days. 6 months of payments moving through Tavi's security system, dressed up as maintenance costs, camera repairs, software licenses that never existed. Micah stood across the desk, one arm still useless in its sling, pointing at a line item near the bottom of the page. This one, Micah said. Executive authorization. Your code. I never authorized this. I know. Soren's hand tightened around the paper until it crumpled at the edge. Somewhere down the hall, Calder Wren was making coffee like it was any other morning, humming something under his breath, the same easy rhythm he always had. Calder had built his whole place in Soren's world on being the man nobody suspected. Helpful, steady, the one who caught mistakes before they became disasters. Detective Rafe Mercer stood near the window, arms crossed, watching both of them with the patience of a man used to waiting for people to lie to him. "Whoever did this wasn't after your money," Mercer said. 12,000 here, 8 there. That's not theft. That's cover." "Cover for what?" Soren said. "For making you paranoid. For making you distrust the people around you until you're the only one left standing. A man alone makes mistakes. A man alone is easy to corner." Soren's eyes moved toward the hallway, toward the sound of Calder's voice, and something in his face changed. "You think it's him. I think," Mercer said carefully, "you should stop assuming and start checking." Micah watched Soren's jaw lock the way it always did right before he did something he'd regret. He'd seen this version of Soren before, the version that stopped asking questions and started making decisions with his hands instead of his head. "Soren." Micah said his name the way you'd say it to someone standing too close to a ledge. "You keep saying you're protecting us. But you're becoming the reason nobody can reach you." The room went quiet enough to hear the coffee maker finish its cycle down the hall. Soren didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had lost its edge. "You think I don't know that. I think you know it and you keep doing it anyway." That landed. Micah watched it land. Watched something in Soren's face crack open for just a second before the control slid back into place. Because that's what Soren did. That's all he'd ever known how to do since the night his own parents were taken from him, the same way Tavi's had almost been taken from Tavi. Micah went back to the records because looking at Soren's face any longer felt like staring at something private he had no right to see. That's when he found it. Buried 3 pages deep, a second authorization. Same executive code. Same system access. Dated 6 months before Calder had ever raised a single concern about the finances. 6 months before anyone in the organization had reason to suspect a thing was wrong. Micah's stomach dropped. "Soren. What? This isn't recent." Micah turned the laptop around so Soren could see the date glowing on the screen. "Somebody's been inside your empire for half a year. Long before any of this started. Long before Tavi was ever in danger." Soren leaned in and the color left his face. Because if that timeline was true, then everything they thought they understood about who was doing this and why was wrong. Somebody had been waiting a very long time. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next part of the story is the one that changes everything you think you know. Drop a comment and tell someone in your life who needs a reminder that the truth always finds its way to the surface. The accusation came fast, and it came from the one place Soren never expected it to. Mercer laid the final report on the table without ceremony. "The credentials used in that 6-month-old authorization," he said. "They weren't Calder's. They weren't stolen from an outside source either." He looked at Micah. "They were yours." The room tilted. Micah felt it in his chest before his mind caught up to the words. Felt the floor go unsteady under a truth he'd been carrying alone for longer than he wanted to admit. "I can explain," Micah said. Soren's face had already closed off. "Then explain. I used my access to look into restricted records. Months ago, before any of this happened. I was checking something, an inconsistency I found in Tavi's file, something that didn't sit right with me. I didn't take money. I didn't touch anything I shouldn't have. I just looked. And you never told me. No. You've been inside my systems, digging through restricted files, for months, and you never once thought that was worth mentioning to me. I didn't know what I was looking at yet. I didn't want to hand you a half-finished fear and watch you burn the whole organization down chasing it." Soren's voice dropped low, and that was worse than shouting. So you decided, on your own, what I was allowed to know about my own family. Micah felt something break open in his chest, something he'd kept sealed since the night this all started. You think I betrayed you because I kept secrets, he said. But you never asked yourself why I felt safer hiding the truth from you than telling it. Soren went quiet. Every time something feels wrong in your world, you don't investigate, Micah said. You react. You move people. You cut them off. I've watched you do it for 3 years. So yes, I kept quiet because the version of you that finds out someone might be a threat to Tavi is not a version that stops to ask questions first. The silence between them stretched long enough that Mercer looked between the two of them like he was watching something private. Soren didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say he understood. He just turned away, toward the window, hands pressed flat on the table like he needed something solid to hold on to. Find whoever did this, he said finally, voice rough. That's all I need from you right now. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't nothing either. Micah went back to the laptop because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse. He pulled every file connected to the 6-month-old authorization, cross-referencing access points, chasing a trail that kept leading to systems only a handful of people in the world should have been able to touch. Systems that required clearance levels above Calder, above security, above almost everyone Soren had ever trusted. Clearance that, as far as Micah knew, only one person outside Soren himself had ever held. A man Soren hadn't spoken of in years. A man Micah had never even met. His phone buzzed. An envelope had been left at the front gate. No return address, no explanation. Inside was a single photograph. Soren, maybe 17 years old, standing beside an older man with sharp eyes and a hand resting on Soren's shoulder like ownership. On the back, in handwriting that looked decades old, one sentence. Your father warned me you would become exactly like him. Micah's hands went cold. He didn't know who the man in the photograph was. But somewhere deep in his gut, he understood that everything they thought they knew about who was doing this, and why, was about to change completely. Gideon Rusk had been dead to Soren for 11 years, and yet here he was, sitting behind a plain wooden desk in an office nobody had traced, waiting like he'd known this meeting was coming since the day Soren was born. You've gotten bigger, Gideon said, looking Soren up and down. Your shoulders, your name, your reach, all of it, exactly the way I built you. You didn't build me. I taught you everything you know about control. Gideon leaned back. Every rule you live by. Every wall you put between yourself and the people who could hurt you. That was me. I gave you the blueprint. Soren's hands stayed at his sides, though every muscle in his body wanted to close the distance between them. You took my nephew. I borrowed him. There's a difference. Where is he? Safe. For now. Gideon's tone stayed even, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. I never wanted to hurt the boy, Soren. I wanted to hurt you. And there's no faster way to hurt a man like you than to threaten the one thing you actually love. Micah stood near the door, arms still bound, listening to every word land like a blow he couldn't block. He'd spent days chasing a name, and now that name sat 6 feet away, calm as a Sunday morning, talking about a kidnapped child like a business decision. Calder worked for you, Micah said. Gideon's eyes shifted toward him with something close to approval. Calder worked for whoever paid best. That happened to be me. He didn't choose you by accident either, Micah. I chose you. Why? Because you're the one person capable of talking Soren out of becoming exactly what I always said he'd become. Gideon's gaze slid back to Soren. I told your father you'd end up just like him. Cold, ruthless, alone at the top of an empire built on other people's fear. He didn't believe me. I've spent 11 years waiting to prove I was right. So this was never about money, Soren said. Never about territory. This was about watching you become angry enough to lose everything you claim to care about. I wanted you violent. I wanted you desperate. I wanted the world to see the monster I always knew was inside you. Gideon's voice hardened for the first time. Instead, you brought him. His eyes flicked to Micah. That wasn't part of the plan. Soren's chest rose and fell, slow and controlled, though Micah could see the effort it took to keep it that way. Where is Tavi? Soren said again. Gideon stood, unhurried, buttoning his jacket like a man closing a meeting that had gone exactly the way he expected. Walk away from everything you've built, he said. The empire, the businesses, all of it. Hand it to me, and the boy comes home tonight. And if I refuse, then you'll have proven me right in a much worse way. Gideon turned toward the door, pausing only once, glancing back at the two of them standing together. You have until sunrise. The door closed behind him, and the room went silent except for the sound of Soren's breathing. Ragged now, the control finally starting to slip. Micah watched him sink into the nearest chair, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. Soren. No answer. Soren, talk to me. When Soren finally looked up, Micah saw something in his eyes he'd never seen there before. He was actually considering it, walking away from everything, giving Gideon exactly what he wanted. And Micah understood, with a cold drop in his stomach, that surrender wouldn't save Tavi. It would only prove Gideon had won. This is the moment everything comes down to, and the story isn't over yet. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss how it ends, and tell me in the comments what you would do in Soren's place. Soren stood in the doorway with his jacket already on, and Micah knew, before either of them said a word, exactly what he was about to do. You're going to give it to him. I'm going to end this. That's not the same thing. Micah stepped in front of him, the way he'd never dared to before, arms still bound, body still healing, standing his ground anyway. You walk away from your empire and Gideon still wins. You'll spend the rest of your life proving he was right about you. That you'll destroy everything you built the second someone threatens what you love. So what would you have me do? Trust someone besides yourself for once. Mercer stepped into the room before Soren could answer, tablet in hand, expression sharp with something that looked almost like hope. We traced the warehouse. Gideon's been operating out of a shipping facility near the river for the last 3 weeks. If we move fast and move together, we can get inside before sunrise. Together, Soren repeated, like the word tasted foreign. That's the part you keep missing, Micah said. You built all of this because you thought power meant nobody could take anything from you again. Soren flinched like he'd been struck. Power didn't protect you from losing people. Micah went on, quieter now. It only taught you to be afraid of losing them. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Soren exhaled, and something in his shoulders came down that had probably been locked in place since he was 17 years old, standing beside a man who taught him that control was the only thing that could keep him safe. Fine, he said. We do it together. The plan came together fast after that. Faster than Micah expected, given how many years Soren had spent trusting no one outside his own circle. Mercer brought in a tactical unit. Soren's people held the perimeter. Micah, against every argument thrown his way, refused to stay behind. You have one working arm, Soren said. I have information nobody else has. I'm coming. Soren didn't argue again. Maybe because there wasn't time. Maybe because some part of him had finally accepted that keeping people at a distance hadn't kept anyone safe. It had only kept him alone. They reached the warehouse just as the first gray light started to break over the river. Soren went in first, alone, exactly as Gideon had demanded, while Mercer's team moved into position outside and Micah stayed, close enough to see through a gap in the loading dock doors. The last thing Micah saw before the doors slammed shut behind Soren was Gideon standing in the center of the warehouse floor, arms open, like a man welcoming home something he'd built with his own hands. Then the door locked, and the sound that followed, a single sharp crack, like a fist against metal, sent every nerve in Micah's body cold. The sound had been a warning shot into the ceiling, not a body hitting the floor, and Micah's knees nearly buckled with relief when Soren's voice rang out from inside, steady and unafraid. "Gideon!" Micah pressed closer to the gap in the door, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. Inside, Gideon stood near a row of crates, Tavi held loosely by one arm, more prop than prisoner at this point, since Gideon had never planned to hurt a child he needed alive to make his point. "You brought company," Gideon said, nodding toward the loading dock. "I brought people who actually care what happens to me. You wouldn't understand the difference." Gideon's mouth twisted, somewhere between a smile and a warning. "Last chance. Walk away from everything, or I make sure this ends badly for everyone in this building." Soren took a slow step forward, hands open at his sides. "You spent 11 years trying to prove I'd become a monster, that the only thing I understood was power and fear. You almost got it right. I did get it right." "No." Soren's voice didn't waver. "You got it wrong the moment you decided threatening a child would break me instead of waking me up." He nodded once toward the door. Mercer's team moved fast. Faster than Gideon could react, faster than Calder, positioned near a side exit, could manage more than 2 steps before an officer had him on the ground. Gideon's grip loosened on Tavi's arm in the confusion, and that half-second was all Soren needed. He crossed the floor and pulled Tavi behind him, putting his own body between the boy and the man who'd shaped his entire life. Gideon looked at the gun on the ground, then at Soren, then at the officers closing in from every side. "You could end this the way I taught you," Gideon said, almost gentle now. "One decision. Nobody would ever question it." Soren looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped back, put the gun on the ground with his foot, and let the officers do what they'd come to do. "That's the difference between us," Soren said. "You needed me to be exactly like you. I don't need anything from you at all." Gideon didn't fight the arrest. Somehow that was the strangest part. A man who'd spent 11 years planning this moment, going quiet the second it finally arrived, like some part of him had already known how it would end. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Several of Soren's businesses came under investigation once the full financial trail came to light. A few of his associates were arrested alongside Calder. His empire, the one Gideon had accused him of loving more than the people inside it, started coming apart at the seams, and Soren let it happen instead of fighting to hold every piece together. He sat with detectives. He answered questions. He accepted consequences he could have avoided with enough money and enough silence, because for the first time in his life, avoiding consequences felt like exactly the kind of control that had put everyone he loved in danger in the first place. Micah watched all of it from a hospital bed, arms still healing, and understood he was watching a man rebuild himself from the ground up. Soren walked in one evening, the same way he had at the very beginning, quiet, without a word, stopping a few feet from the bed. But this silence didn't feel like fear anymore. "Did you save him?" Micah asked. "We did," Soren said. Micah noticed the word. "Not I. We." Soren sat down beside the bed, close enough that their hands almost touched. "When you leave this hospital," he said, "where do you want to go?" Micah thought about it. Really thought about it. For the first time in 3 years, allowing himself to want something just for himself. "Somewhere you aren't my boss." Soren almost smiled. Then I'll meet you there. Outside the hospital a few days later, Soren stood waiting without reaching for him, without pulling him close the way he might have before all of this happened. He just waited, giving Micah the space to choose. Micah crossed that distance himself. That night, months ago, Soren had arrived at the hospital without a word. Now, standing outside those same doors, the silence between them didn't feel like fear anymore. Felt like a choice. If the story moved you, hit subscribe and turn on your notifications, because there's another story like this one coming soon, and you won't want to miss it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what part of Soren and Micah's story stayed with you the longest, and pass this along to someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to choose a different kind of strength.